All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's in our webinar so far. I'm John Lazaro from Samahan ng Progresibong Kabataan, and with me is my co-moderator, Synth Punabomorn from Focus on the Global South. Synth, kindly introduce yourself as well, thanks.
Sure, thanks, John. And hello, everyone. I'm Sin Number One from Focus on the Global South. We are a regional organization based in Asia, providing analysis and advocate for a just, democratic, and more accountable social, political, economic change. Nice to meet you all for today. And back to John.
Thank you for that, Synth. Just a few notes before we begin introducing the rest of the webinar. You can share your questions, if you have any, for our speakers throughout the session via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen or in the comment section below. One of the moderators will monitor the comments, so that's either me or Synth, and select a range of them that the speakers can engage with. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be able to respond to all questions or comments, but we nonetheless encourage your engagement with our speakers as well as with us, your moderators. Synth?
Yes, sure. And for the option for interpretation today, we have Bahasa and Thai. So you can see the sign on your screen, the globe icon. And for Thai, you can use Chinese since we didn't have the option for Thai, but you can clearly see the Thai interpreter interpreting for you. And I think now we also have the option for Bahasa already available as well. Yes. So that's for me for now. John, you have any house rule?
Right. Thanks for that, Synth. Throughout the session, we'll be sharing links to resources and further readings in the chat box. You can also engage there, but be aware that the questions in the chat may be answered by other participants rather than the speakers. A few more housekeeping notes for ground rules for our discussion, because we do want this to be a discussion between us and you, the audience. We ask for respectful engagement with each other as well as with the principles of EEPF, and request that we behave accordingly in the chat box. We also ask that questions, again, for the speakers be directed via the Q&A box, just a reminder, rather than the chat box. So thank you so much for being here for this critical discussion. And I'd like to introduce our program for today, which is the Academic Freedom as a Democratizing Factor Youth Forum. Democratic regression in Asia and Europe has met the contraction of democratic spaces within campuses globally. Now, our youth speakers will discuss how pressures from state and non-state forces on student movements in Asia and Europe have affected their ability to build and sustain academic freedom within and beyond campuses. Sim?
Yes, and for today's format, and yesterday, some of you may already attended a very vibrant and enthusiastic exchange environment we have in the yesterday International Youth Campaign. And today's session will be a bit different. So today will be a webinar. We will feature 8 speakers from the co-organizers, which we will be shortly introducing to you. And after that, we will follow by a Q&A session, like John mentioned, that we will engage via the Q&A chat box. And finally, we will close with the conclusion session, focusingly on the ways forward, how we can tackle on academic freedom issue as a democratizing factor. And yes, again, speakers, you will have 8 minutes to deliver. And since we have interpretation available today, so I may ask all of you to please speak slowly to facilitate the interpreter for us. And we will remind you in your personal chat box on the time left for your presentation in 1 minute timeout. And back to you, John.
Thanks, Synth. So we'll introduce our speakers before we get into our first speaker. Our event today is hosted by 8 youth organizations from all over the world. The All India Students Association, the Progressive Students Collective, Labor for a Green New Deal, Time's Up Ateneo, the Transnational Institute, Samahan ng Progresibong Kabataan, Thai Student Union, and Serikat Mahasiswa Indonesia, or SMI. First up for our list of webinar speakers is N. Sai Balaji, or as he prefers to be called, Balaji, from the All India Students Association. Balaji is a third-year PhD student from Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. Presently, he is the national president of the All India Students Association. He was elected the president of the Jawaharlal Nehru University Students' Union between 2018 and 2019. Balaji, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. So I can start, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Raquel, and thank you for this opportunity. Going right to the point, academic freedom as a democratic indicator. I mean, in India, as of today, both the academic freedom and democracy both are under threat. To be fair, the academic freedom in India has taken a fascistic turn. To go back to history, if we go back to 1930s and the war cry of the Nazis, if you recollect that, the state has been conquered, but not yet the universities. The intellectual paramilitaries are coming in, raise your flags, announced the German fascistic student group after Nazis took power in January 1933. After that, they went on burning libraries, ransacking books, and everything. And when you compare this parallel with what happened in India, in 2019, after the present government won its second term, the general secretary of the party that came into power, Bharatiya Janata Party, Ram Madhav, in an editorial on May 24th said, under Modi too, the remnants of pseudo-secular liberal cartel needs to be discarded from the country's academic, cultural and intellectual landscape. The eerie of similarities of what is unfounding in India today with the Nazi Germany can hardly be missed. Though it has been said in 2019, this can be a theme which we can analyze what has been happening in India from 2014. Academic freedom in India can be understood in three distinct themes, which I will be briefly indicating what they are. Unfortunately, the government in power today has an ideology of hate that drives them, just like the Nazis and the other fascists that have ruled the world in the 1930s and have caused utter mayhem. They have hatred towards Muslims, hatred towards Christians, hatred towards Sikhs, hatred towards minorities, Dalits who constitute the lower hierarchy in the Indian caste, in the caste hierarchy, in the social hierarchy, the indigenous groups called Adivasis, women anti-woman hatred in India is rising, and just like the race supremacy that we have seen in America and other places, in India we are seeing the caste supremacy that has come to power. The three themes, the first theme that I would like to touch upon is the attacks on teachers, students, and universities through harassment and intimidation of cases. Right from the time the Modi government came into power, universities became the hotspots for the resistance of the anti-people policies of the Modi government. In 2014, a film institute in Pune resisted against appointing a person who was completely not competent to head a film institute. In 2015-16, Hyderabad Central University is one of the premier universities in India. One of the Dalit students who belongs to a socially lower hierarchy was institutionally murdered when the ruling party, the vice chancellor, and everyone forced the person to commit suicide because he resisted the ideology of hate in his campus. Similarly, Jawaharlal Nehru University students were slapped with sedition cases. Delhi University students were attacked by the ABVP. ABVP is the student organization of RSS, which is the parent ideological organization of the ruling party BJP. Students were thrashed. They were called anti-national. Teachers, students have been slapped with UAPA, which is an anti-terror law that has been brought in. Professors like renowned Dalit professor and public intellectual in India, Anand Tentumble, renowned legal eminist Sudha Bharadwaj have been falsely slapped with anti-terror charges. Students who have been resisting the divisive citizenship law that the government introduced in 2019 have been picked up during a lockdown, during the last pandemic, and have been lying in jail for no fault of theirs because they were defending the constitution, democracy, and they were telling categorically, we do not want division among citizenship. You cannot deny citizenship to a particular community because they come from a different religion. As we have seen, the present regime can be compared to the colonial British government, which committed immense brutality on people of India, be it the 5th January attack on JNU by the ABVP militia, who broke students' skulls, teachers' skulls, be it the police who entered the Jamia Millia University, which is one of the premier universities in India, entered the library, brutally attacked the students. It was recorded on CCTV. The police denies even now that they did not beat, but it's brutal. It's recorded in the CCTV. All this happened because JNU students were resisting fee hike. Jamia students were protesting against the divisive anti-CAA laws. Interestingly, this period of history, the militias that the government and their subsidiaries are unleashing is somewhat similar to what happened in Germany. We might remember the brown shirts militia. In Italy, we remember the black shirt militia. Ironically, the RSS uniform is brown shirts and black cap. It resembles what the Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy resembled. And for this government, there is no difference between public or private universities. They are against intellectualism. They are against the process of learning. They are against universities being the hub for learning. They want universities to be turned into propaganda. So if you stand with the idea of learning, you will be assaulted. If you stand with the idea of propaganda, you will be rewarded. It's here, the second theme of what is happening in India is very important. Rewards for those who are standing by propaganda, by appointing them as faculties in universities is happening. So you don't need a degree as of now. Even if you have a degree that's dubious, that has massive plagiarism, you have been part of those militias that have been assaulting people. I mean, in my own university, someone who has been assaulting students is now a professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And so their idea is not only appoint the people who have the ideology of hating universities, but appoint so competent people that universities will turn into places of propaganda. This government is anti-science, anti-rationality. Whatever limited public universities, it is being spent on irrelevant research like how cow dung and cow urine can fight COVID, and how nonsensical, we can say, as bullshit is being propagated in the name of science, research in this country. And the government is not only supporting, but it's propagating and authenticizing everything that is happening in India. Unfortunately, what is being pitted as traditional versus modern in India, it has never been the scenario of that case, be it medical science, be it knowledge systems, both coexisted. But the hatred towards the evidence-based modern medicine or science that propagates rationality, it's humongous. And it's here my third theme, and with which I'll be concluding, is how they're trying to systematically overhaul the university system. They want to change the brick and mortar universities that we know as of now, the learning processes that we know as of now, the socialization process that we know, to turn into a digital fora, into an online medium. And COVID is being used as that medium to turn universities into an online education platform, to a digital education platform. When India was reeling under pandemic, when people were dying due to COVID last year, my government, without any discussion in the parliament, without any discussion with anyone, declared a new education program that categorically promotes online education in a country that has over 60% of the population without any kind of internet access. Only 30 to 40% of this country has internet access. That too, when I talk about internet access, it's mobile internet, and we know how it fluctuates. And if we go into the detailed statistics, only 8% of this country has some sort of digital gadget.
Hi, Balaji. Excuse me. Sorry. Please wrap up.
Is being turned into history. Syllabuses are being centralized, are being dictated by the union government, be it universities, be it colleges, be it schools. Progressive syllabus, progressive syllabus in schools and colleges is being rewritten. COVID is being used as a tool to destroy the traditional university system into turning into a digital online education program. To make it more clear, in India, cricket is nothing.
Sorry, excuse me, Balaji. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Please wrap up. We do.
Yeah, just have 1 minute. I'm wrapping it up on 1 minute.
Sure.
Just 1 minute. Yeah. In India, education is being turned into a commodity. The example I was trying to give, in India, cricket is a religion. Cricket team is being sponsored by an online education company. The Indian cricket team captain is the brand ambassador for an online education company, and we are adopting a model that has been rejected by the United States presently, which was brought in US because of a post-Vietnam War scenario where the Reagan government wanted to control activism in universities. They destroyed the public-funded universities through the loan model, which is being imposed in India. The only last thing that I would like to say, and I would like to end, during the COVID, all the public sector units and the public universities are being sold. The rich have become more richer. Small statistics. With this, I would close my presentation. In the pandemic, one of the India's richest businessmen, Mukesh Ambani, earned $13 million per hour for 365 days. Adani, the second richest person in Asia, has earned $2.5 million per hour for 365 days. At the same time, in the last 1 year, more than 20 million people have lost their jobs and livelihoods. I will rest my case here. Academic freedom and democracy in India are a threat. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Balaji, for your rich presentation. And we can see clearly how the illiberal turn the government may take that have immense and direct impact on civil liberty and academic freedom. And especially that when Balaji compared the situation from 2014 with the Nazis regime back then. And as we see, the more illiberal the BJP government turns to be, we see the crackdown on the students, on the intellectual communities, on civil defenders, on minorities, and potentially on the application of harsh punishment. He mentioned the criminalization on sedition laws, on terrorism law, and more so the essence of education by the government decisions that base not at all on science. It's everything based on anti-science, less on any evidence base, and which anchor very much the academic and intellectual community back there. And I think we see a lot of paradox here when the government try to say that with the new education policy, they would like to boost up enrollment. But during COVID pandemic, we can see that maybe students are more and more have the dropout rate and they have no assistance at all. And again, with the Ministry of Education imposed on the education policy to install the infrastructure, digital one, and people without access to the internet can have like a vicious cycle of disadvantages out of this kind of policies that are very anti-people. Yeah. And I think we will have a lot of discussion out of this after this, but due to time constraint, I will go straight to our second panelist here. Please welcome Ali Raza from Progressive Students Collective. Ali, are you here with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sure, so I will continue introducing you then. Right, so Ali Raza is a student of sociology at GCU Lahore. He is the editor-in-chief of the Students Herald, a student-led magazine of the Progressive Students Collective. And along with his comrade, he's now trying to revive the progressive student movement in Pakistan, trying to integrate the ongoing struggle to restore student unions there. And he's been part of a variety of civil rights campaigns in Pakistan, consistently engaged with working class communities, helped organize medical camps during the pandemic, and been part of the humanitarian effort, student effort to set up public libraries in remote areas. So take the floor, Ali.
Thank you so much, Kitanath. So the situation of academic freedom in Pakistan is not so much different from India, which is described by Comrade Balaji. But I would say the privilege that Comrade Balaji and other comrades in India have is the student union. At least they have a platform to unite, to express their views. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, we even don't have student union. Generally, when a student take admission in any university or education institution, he expect to be asked that what are his or her expectations from university. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, when we take admission in university, first of all, we have to sign an agreement with the university, which says that we will never take part in any political activity in university. So you can understand the academic freedom in Pakistan. On every other day, we see any threat from unknown people or religiously motivated people, and or expulsions of teachers and students, even murders of students and teachers by unknown people or religiously motivated extremists. So this is the situation which we are facing in Pakistan, and I think there are multiple reasons of this situation. And I think to understand or accept anyone's opinion or even disagree with anyone's argument or opinion in a polite way, I think this is a learning process. This is something that we learn through practice. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, because of its long history of martial laws, the state and I say many people of Pakistan couldn't learn this practice to disagree with someone in a polite way. And even the many people can't imagine, but in Pakistan, many educational institutions have military and paramilitary stations in campuses. The only purpose of these stations are to control the opinion of students and teachers, to control their voices, to curb their freedoms. And secondly, the student union in Pakistan is banned since 1984. Because of this situation, in universities, we don't have culture of debate or to express our views and to express our views. And unfortunately, Pakistani students don't have any opinion in policy making or policy implementations or any type of voice in education process. So I think that is the reason why we can't learn the process to disagree with someone in a polite way. Secondly, I think the students, that's why we have to restore the students union, and this will be our first step towards academic freedom in Pakistan at least. So because of this, my organization, Progressive Students Collective, is fighting for the restoration of student union. For 5 years. We organize protests, rallies, and in fact, in 2019 and 20, we organized rallies in more than 50 cities of Pakistan for the restoration of student union. But unfortunately, still Pakistani government or state didn't uplift the ban on student union. So because of absence of student union, we also have to face many problems in during a pandemic, because many school and university students had to leave education because of lack of resources, or even the resources which we had, they were not utilized because the students can't express their problems or communicate their problems with authorities because they don't have representation. And that's why I think firstly we have to restore student union in Pakistan. Secondly, the problem which was also mentioned by Comrade Balaji is the religious extremism. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we have same situation just like India, that in India, Muslims are persecuted by Hindus and other upper castes. In Pakistan, minorities are persecuted and under threat by Muslims. And I will say that in many countries, the situation is, many countries of the world, the situation is same. So I think we have, this is a global threat. The rise in religious extremism is a global threat, and we need to make a policy to front this threat globally.
Hello, Ali. Is Ali still in the
Sorry,
call? Oh, there.
I just
Hello, Ali?
I think
Oh, there.
so. I think we have to make a global response on this situation against the rise of extremism. So I would request two things with two other comrades, that in the point of student union, which is our national problem in we just have in Pakistan, I would request you to support us in this matter on international platforms, uh, to highlight our problem, so then that Pakistani state may take any measure. And on other problem, which is religious extremism, which ultimately, if it will present in society, it also affects our academic freedoms, as mentioned by Comrade Balaji also, that this is anti-intellectualism, this is anti-science. So to make a global response, to make a global policy, at least we, the progressives, have to uh, unite in a platform. So I suggest all comrades that we should make a student alliance, student union on international level to deal with such problems, and to learn from others' experience, so that we can make a better society, or can uh, contribute from ourselves for a better society. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Ali Raza from the Progressive Students Collective of Pakistan. We have two questions for you. I'm sorry, we can only accommodate two in the interest of time. One is from Julia Martinez. What are the small steps Pakistan is making towards academic freedom? And a second is from Chana Chai Chot Sangri. How can transnational communities play a part to stop this academic suppression? So I guess we can go first with Julia's question. What are the small steps Pakistan is making towards academic freedom?
Sorry, I couldn't understand your first question. I understand your second question, but I couldn't get the first question.
All right, so I can go on to the second question before we tackle Julia's question. Chanachai Chok Sangri asks, how can transnational communities play a part to stop this academic suppression?
I think every other communities can raise your voice for Pakistan, which is our right. Under Article 17, we have right to speak and associate and have our opinions, whatever we have, but Pakistani state don't give this. So I request you all to raise your voice on every platform where someone from Pakistani authorities is is presented, so they can have some pressure on their actions and make some better decisions.
Thanks for that, Ali. Do you want to still answer Julia Martinez's question, or do you want to move on to the next speaker? Julia asks, what are the small steps Pakistan is making towards academic freedom? So I think when she says Pakistan, when Julia says Pakistan, she means the Pakistani government. What are the small steps the Pakistani government is making towards academic freedom?
Unfortunately, they are taking very bad steps. You can understand this from this example that in Punjab, which is largest province of Pakistan, in last year, they make a law that no one can publish any book without the permission of Pakistani government, and they will check this book on two grounds, which is first is two-nation theory. No books can be published which reject or disagree with two nations theories, which means India, Hindus and Muslims are separate nations, and they had to separate. They had to make different countries. Secondly, they said the second ground is that that book will never disagree with the religious opinions, which is also not Islamic, but a specific sect of represent a specific sect of Islam, which means not just minorities cannot publish any book, but also the other sects of Islam cannot express their opinion. So these are the decisions which Pakistani government is taking towards academic freedom. On the other words, we can say that they are not making positive steps toward academic freedom, but they are making negative steps. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ali Raza. One thing that I seem to have noticed with our speakers so far is that the methods of authoritarian governments in clamping down on academic freedom and basic rights are very similar. It's just that in the case of Pakistan, I think what we can say is that they are what happens if governments succeed in clamping down on the basic right of speech, the basic right of organization, and a basic right of conscience. So thank you so much for that, Ali Raza of the Progressive Students Collective. Next up is Abel Harvey Clark from the Labour for a Green New Deal in the United Kingdom. Abel is a first-year undergraduate student at SOAS University in London, involved in student organizing for free education and against borders. Since organizing school climate strikes in 2019, he is working with Labour for a Green New Deal to build internationalist climate action in the UK Labour movement. Abel?
Cool, thanks very much, John. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to share some slides. I hope that's all right with people. There we go. I hope people can see that. So yeah, so hi, again, I'm Abel. I'm a student at SOAS in London, speaking here today from Labour for a Green New Deal, which was a campaign set up in the Labour Party in the UK in 2019, really focusing on the urgency of the climate crisis and the need for much more radical, climate-orientated and socialist politics to tackle that. I think that's a theme that runs through a lot of the organising happening in the UK. With today's session on academic freedom, I'm going to talk about the struggles that are going on in universities, but also I think talk about how those struggles in universities are really a reflection of a wider struggle that's existing throughout UK society, and I think across the world, the struggle against exploitation, against oppression, and really against capital's rule over the labour of the working people of the world. And I think it's really important when we consider what academic freedom might mean. It's not, I think we have to move beyond to maybe a more liberal definition that is sustaining education and sustaining study in a university which has, especially in the UK, adapted quite well to the neoliberal system. And the university has actually played a key role in sustaining these systems of exploitation, in sustaining the destruction of the natural world, and it has a key link with that. I hope to bring that out. And so while our struggle for academic freedom is not just to sustain this, but to create break down the walls of the university, I think, and have academia as something that can really have an impact on struggle throughout the rest of society. So the first picture on the slide here is from one of the rent strikes that happened in university accommodation in the UK this year. And I think the COVID pandemic has certainly shocked a lot of students into action. as was seen in the rent strikes and also some fee strikes, where students are starting to take collective action in universities to challenge the university system. But I'm going to go and maybe explain where it has some maybe deeper roots, and the roots of academic oppression and restrictions on academic freedom do certainly run deeper than the COVID pandemic. There's a few different photos from here from different campaigns that have been going on for a few years. The most obvious and one of the most well-known restrictions on academic freedom, the most immediate one that students come up against, is the government's Prevent agenda that the UK, the Conservative right-wing government, introduced this in the 2010s. It was known as an anti-radicalization policy, but it's also been known to be extremely Islamophobic, particularly target students of color, particularly target students who are involved in international solidarity, particularly around solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and other struggles against imperialism around the world. So that's, and I think so, students again have set up this campaign called Preventing Prevent, educating both themselves as students, but also workers in the institutions about how to resist the implementation of this policy, this Prevent policy. The other campaign that I want to highlight is Universities Resist Border Controls. So it's again introduced by the recent, the Conservative government in the 2010s, but with deeper roots in the UK state. Borders in university have been known to create what the government actually calls a hostile environment for immigrants in this country. And as the graphic shows, these borders are really seen as a damage to knowledge, and they really restrict the rights of international students to organise, particularly in the way that universities now function as surveillance on behalf of the government, on behalf of the state. And this can really restrict the ability to get a visa. So for example, a student attending a demonstration involved in political organising, as well as the Prevent agenda, might also be flagged and might compromise their visa situation. I think the fact that students are organising around this shows that not only will they be held account by the students who are funding them with their fees, but also the staff. So both, I think, the students and staff are really realising their position as the engine of the university. And with their resistance, if they do not comply, these policies start to become more come into question, and they can be really challenged by students and workers in the university organising against them. And the other issue to flag, the demilitarized graphic at the bottom, is to flag the issue of universities in the way they're now operating as businesses in the UK, have a lot of investments in really in oppressive regimes around the world, whether that's funding Israeli arms companies has been called out a lot recently, but also investments in companies and states committing human rights abuses around the world. But as there's been a real push in universities to hold them account on these issues. So I'll go to my next slide. And I think I want to share this slide here because it's a graphic that was produced by a friend of mine at SOAS, also in her first year. And it's really showing how this shouldn't come as a surprise, the role of UK institutions in their contribution and complicity in oppression worldwide. And that starts from the university, but spreads out into wider society. I think she's I think it's a beautiful graphic that she's drawn, but she's showed how the Western academia, Western institutions do sit at the center of this colonial history, which is exerted power, exerted these ideas of objectivity and neutrality and Western logic onto the rest of the world, and in return brought in capital from the rest of the world through resources, through labor, and also and at the same time spread out these values of racial capitalism, of patriarchy, of white supremacy, but really seeing how Western academia has contributed to that, has supported it. But I think the flip side of this, and the reason why I have the screenshot of Paulo Freire on the side of the screen here, is because this Western academia, I think, while it has played this role in the past, it still does not function without the compliance of both the students and the staff in the university, the people who produce the knowledge, who make this university work, from the cleaning staff in the university who make it a space that we can enter, from the catering staff, but also, of course, the academic staff and the students who are in the universities producing the knowledge. And I think there's this solid black line around the Western academia in the center of this graphic. But I think what's really recognized as an objective of students in UK universities is to break down the way that knowledge is kept and constrained and restricted in universities, and actually have it as something that should be spread throughout wider struggles. And the knowledge that we produce, and the reason why I wanted to share Marina, is who's produced this graphic, is because there's a push now for students actually not to keep their work as dedicated to the institution, but dedicate their work to the wider struggle, not to produce it for the university, but to use the university as a place in order to help the wider struggle. So yeah, and I'd really encourage people to go and stay in touch with Marina Tricks, who I've put her handle on there, that people can check out more of her work. And so yeah, and so I think this is and again, coming back to Paulo Freire on the side of the screen, it's a kind of education that is not, he makes the distinction between banking education, in which students go to university to passively accept what is passed down from the institution, from the historical forms of power that fund the institution, but instead for students to be active participants in education and to contribute back, for students to be listened to, and students, yeah, to be active participants in their learning. I think that really opens up, universities as a place that can contribute to wider struggles. And I think that's actually has happened quite successfully in the past few years. So on this next slide is a few images from where students, I think, have taken their position in education, but used their awareness of what's going on wider in the UK and across the world to really challenge it. So on the top left is this from the climate strikes, where students recognized that they wouldn't want to go to school anymore because it was irrelevant to learn this, what their education they were receiving in school was irrelevant and compared to the climate catastrophe that is going on around us. On the top right is a really recent demonstration that happened at a school in London, at Pimlico Academy, of course inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement that happened this few years ago, but students went on strike from their school, demanded that the headmaster was sacked because of racist uniform policies, and they have also really raised the issue of a much more radical curriculum being needed, learning about Black history, learning about history of struggles, rather than the very, people maybe say they want to keep politics out of education, but I think we can see this is not really an option. And what is currently offered is an education with a distinct conservative political line. But and again, I can't really talk about academic freedom and the struggles in school without giving a mention to the Kill the Bill movement, which is happening right now in the UK. So the UK government is trying to essentially introducing a new law which would make it basically remove the rights to peaceful protest. It's the police crime and sentencing bill creates restrictions on protest for anything that creates any kind of disturbance, any kind of nuisance to the public would become illegal, and there'll be greater increased powers of the police. And that's along with other things in the bill that is racist attacks on Roma and Gypsy and traveller communities as well. I think another law that is ongoing, which is actually restricting the right to challenge the new Kill the Bill movement. And the reason I have the picture here of the right to strike is because that's something that has limited trade unions. Anti-trade union laws in the UK have been very restrictive. And actually we see trade unions' right to strike, whether that's...
Sorry to interrupt, Ebo. You have maybe 30 seconds to wrap up, please.
Cool, thank you. Yes, I will do.
Thanks.
So both the right to strike from students in school, to education workers, and also industrial workers, the right to strike is a really key foundation, the way we fight back. And so I'll wrap up on this last slide, is why I think to spread that idea of strike, of disruption, the university is a really powerful center for whatever the institution does, which is very complicit, to bring together students and workers, is a really powerful place to actually start a resistance and make international connections. I think that one comes with making connections with university institutions across the world, as I'm really happy to be doing here. From the university, we are making connections with campaigns like here. It's not an advertisement for H&M. It's a support for the Myanmar workers against who are striking against the coup in Myanmar. There's also been a lot of student advocacy for the Uyghur struggle in China against the Chinese state oppression. And I think making links with
Abel, you still with us? All right. Maybe we can go ahead since Abel already comes to the wrap up part. And we have seen clearly, a very alarming situation, even in the UK, on the restriction on campus. We hear on the law, very shocking to me, from the global south perhaps, that even in the democratic regime in the UK, perhaps under the conservative government, there's a lot of bills, a lot of campaigns, still restricting academic freedom and students' activity on campus. But I think a very interesting thing that we see how students together organize in campus and beyond as well, even outside the youth issue on solidarity campaign for Palestine, for anti-discrimination or culture or anything that are non-progressive agenda for the society. And for now, I think we have quite lots of questions coming already, and it's been a very complex discussion also in comment and questions. So I suggest that perhaps we leave it at the end to perhaps compile and later deliver again to the floor. And Abel, if you are back, I think I would like to ask you that we move forward to the fourth panelist due to time constraints. Thanks, Abel. For sure that we're going to come back a lot on discussion later on. And for us now, for the fourth panelist with us today is Jafet Harman. And Jafet is a student activist based in Switzerland. He is a prospective intern with transnational institution next year in 2022. TNI, or Transnational Institute, is an international research and advocacy institute committed to building a just, democratic, and sustainable world. And they've been working for 40 years to provide unique nexus between social movements, engaged scholar and policymakers, and is a well-known analysis key global organization researching on mainstream concerns coming to policy, seeing big picture analysis provide for a just and pragmatic solution. So Jafet is here with us. And before Jafet have his presentation, I would like to announce for all our audiences, for our interpretation options again, we are now having Chinese for Thai. Chinese button is for Thai English translation. We have Bahasa and also Khmer for your convenience. So go ahead, Jafet, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I would also like to show a few slides to this topic. So I hope you can see it. So thank you, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Sorry. Okay. I will try to add a perspective as a young person currently living in Switzerland. I grew up in Namibia, which has an extreme history of oppression through colonization and apartheid. But the last 5 years, I've completed my schooling in Switzerland, and I want to add this perspective to the debate. So first, I want to point out that I stand in solidarity with those who fight against an oppressive state that prevents academic freedom and therefore undermines democracy. I believe this is a very important issue, and without deflecting from it, I want to bring up a more subtle way academic freedom is undermined in Europe and specifically in Switzerland. For me, the two main factors are corporate power and their financing of academic agendas, as well as misinformation by the right wing and corporations. So firstly, I would like to take a look at corporate power and specifically corporate financing. Important is the funding of institutes, with whom I mean hospitals and research facilities, and additionally the funding of universities. Due to the amount of funding the institutes get from corporations, they're practically forced to use the products and equipment from the corporations, even if these are not the most effective. And in some cases, even the doctors are pushed to suggest treatment to customers, even if there's no scientific facts that these help. And the universities and even schools more and more rely on money from the private sector in contrast to money from the public sector. And this, of course, poses multiple threats. It has been proven that universities financed by corporations are more likely to publish favorable findings for these corporations. In Mainz and Australia, there have been cases where corporations have become so powerful that they influence the boards of the universities and thus the hiring and firing process. So they have a veto right for which researchers or which professors are allowed to come to the universities, or which should be fired or should not be fired. Additionally, the corporations can influence what the university researches and even force them to withhold finding if these are unfavorable for their products and thus unfavorable for their position in the market. This, of course, leads to a bias towards cooperation in the evidence-based policy process. So in this context, it is not so much the state threatening academic freedom, but much more the deep pockets of the corporations, and this leads to a loss of academic integrity and ultimately undermines academic diversity, critical thinking, and democratic processes. Secondly, since Switzerland is a direct democracy, the population can bring up initiatives and referendums on any agenda they believe is important right now or would be important for the future. And for these to come up in the general election so that the whole population votes on them, a threshold of signature must be surpassed. So you can go out and if you think the agenda is important and just go through the city and gain signatures for a cause. And to get to this threshold and then have a chance to win the elections, a lot of money is needed, which the corporations, of course, have. This leads to an unfair advantage for those agendas supported by big corporations, and especially in initiatives or referendums against big corporations, you see a clear problem with how much the one side gets support, financial support, in contrast to how much the other one gets. A good example for this would be the Responsible Business Initiative, to which I will say a bit more shortly. Secondly, but also interrelated, I want to talk about misinformation. In the last couple of years, we've seen a rise of systematic misinformation, especially in America under Donald Trump. And this has sadly also grown in Switzerland. And a new PISA study has shown that the Swiss youth is below average in Europe in the ability to differentiate between fake news and facts. This has a detrimental effect on democracy because the next generation has a problem making an informed decision based on facts, whereby there's a push by the right-wing politicians and corporations to water down discussions with misinformation. I think this is extremely important in a country like, of course, it's also important in other countries, but in Switzerland, where you have, besides the elections of representatives, 4 to 8 elections on initiatives and referendum each year, and a lot of people go out and vote. And this also has an impact on academic integrity and can then change how the people vote in an election. As I said, a good example would be the Responsible Business Initiative, on which was voted last year. The initiative from civil society aimed that corporations with their headquarters in Switzerland had to uphold human rights, labor, and ecological standards in their production and their subsidiaries in other countries. This initiative would have cut the profits of companies like Nestle and Glencore, because they, of course, exploit labor and environment, including child labor and the complete disregard of safety standards in mines and in all of their production industry in Africa or also in Latin America. Due to this problem for them that they would lose so much profit, they hired a PR firm under the name Fugahugi to do an advertising campaign and spread misinformation on posters, social media, and in newspapers. with a disregard to fact-based policy debate. This undermines democratic decision-making. And here on the bottom left hand, you can see that the majority of the population wanted to vote yes before the PR campaign. And you see also men, women, and then the different first languages in Switzerland and the level of education. And here on the right side, there's an example of this deliberate misinformation, which in this case was able to derail a fact-based debate. It says that every company is affected by this initiative. However, the initiative clearly states that only those companies that have economical power over their suppliers will be held accountable. So those companies that can change how their suppliers act and how their suppliers produce. Sadly, they were successful and the initiative was rejected. Even though it had the majority of the popular vote, it did not have the majority of the cantons, which is needed for initiative to pass into legislation. So to sum it up, besides an oppressive state, academic freedom is also currently weakened by corporations and deliberate misinformation, which undermines democratic process. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for that, Jaffa. We see that the issue of academic freedom is not just an issue of the direct violence of the state or of extremism within the countries that we are operating in, but also the quiet, the silent, the subtle violence of capital, which is something that we see not only in Switzerland, but all over the world, in fact. This is a situation that pervades the world, pervades the global capitalist system, which basically just exploits the entire world. So thank you so much for that, Japhet. Thank you for the very crucial insights that you've provided. Now let's move on next to Dana Aduna of Time's Up Ateneo. Dana Aduna is an instructor of philosophy and a member of Time's Up Ateneo, a collective of survivors and advocates fighting sexual violence in Ateneo de Manila University. Dana?
Thank you, John. Good day to everyone. Let me just share my screen. Thank you again to John, to Synth, and to the rest of the organizers for facilitating this important discussion. First, I want to say that my talk discusses sexual violence, so may I please invite you to take care, to breathe, and to reach out to others. Again, I'm Dana Aduna from Time's Up Ateneo, an anti-sexual violence collective of survivors and advocates. Our collective was formed after protests against sexual violence and impunity in the Ateneo de Manila University, Philippines in October 2019. In this video, you see protesters march on campus, and among our chants, in translation, is Ateneo Rise, listen to the victims. In my short talk, I want to discuss how sexual violence infringes upon academic freedom and how we can empower each other to exercise our academic freedom in pursuit of gender and social justice. I come from my lived experience as a woman in a department where women are underrepresented and with a long-standing history of sexual violence. I did my master's degree in this department, and I currently am a contingent faculty member in the same department. During our graduate studies, my fellow graduate students and I found that the issue of sexual violence had made it difficult to be mentored and be mentored safely. Our academic choices became very much limited. We shared how we tried to avoid certain courses, comprehensive exam and thesis topics and projects, sometimes even missing out on much needed income to protect ourselves. And that sometimes compromising situations were just impossible to avoid. Since our department teaches certain required undergraduate courses, more often undergraduate students had even less of a choice. My heart breaks to think that there are students who came to class and their exams and to campus with the fear of being abused. And to think about that sense of betrayal that comes with being abused by people supposed to mentor you. With this experience and knowledge, my fellow graduate students and junior faculty joined the protests in October 2019 and published a statement against sexual violence and misogyny in our department. We found that sexual violence is abetted and perpetuated in male-dominated and misogynistic environments, and philosophy departments and spaces tend to be such environments. The patriarchal orientation of the discipline at times manifests in looking down on feminist philosophy and activist philosophy and rejecting these in the academic space. For instance, when I created a philosophy syllabus consisting of all women philosophers, I was rebuked for going overboard with my feminism, and I had to modify my syllabus in succeeding semesters. Also, the misogyny against women, especially those who speak up, serves to perpetuate the same injustice and impunity that surround sexual violence. So we find that issues of academic freedom, diversity, and gender justice intersect. Sexual violence and patriarchal violence continually push women and marginalized genders out of certain disciplines and spaces. And the continuing underrepresentation of marginalized genders in these spaces and disciplines makes sexual violence more difficult to combat. So we find ourselves in this vicious cycle. We are now seeing a wave of protests against sexual violence in many schools in the Philippines, mostly led by young students and professionals. When breaking the silence, survivors and advocates are often met with repression and retaliation. This is one of our findings in a study that Times Up Ateneo is conducting on retaliation against survivors and advocates in schools. Sorry. I find that in many instances, the way institutions respond to legitimate criticism of their policies and practices contradicts their professed commitment to democracy and social justice. And in certain instances, their response contradicts their own denouncement of authoritarian laws, such as the Anti-Terror Act in the Philippines. A final note, sexual violence is an issue of power, and it is important to recognize power differentials rather than ignore them, as so often happens. Unfortunately, it is often people in power, sometimes even institutions, who invoke academic freedom, quote unquote, to push back against critique and resistance to institutional harms. As Times Up Ateneo and many other survivors and advocates in other schools have found, it is important to recognize the great risks that come with breaking with the culture of silence in institutions, especially when it is vulnerable members who are often pushed to do so. As I'm sure many of my fellow advocates would, I would like to urge people in a position of power relative to these vulnerable people, not to police their tone, not to retaliate against them, and not to push them out of the community. Rather, when the youth and other vulnerable members of our community speak up, our duty as a community is to listen and to protect them and to take responsibility for the harms they have suffered and to commit to doing better. So that's it for me, and this is how you can find us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana, for a very rich and again, very encouraging campaign you are having. And we think that is a very fundamental element to academic freedom as well, that we ensure gender responsive on ending of misogyny and other sexism that apply either on the course design or on the imbalanced representation in our education system, as well as sometimes also apply to the employment as well of women in many circles here. And I've seen that Times Up Ateneo has many both active and reactive campaigns in response to combat sexual violence and impunity, both in and beyond campus, and that's very important. And I've checked out as Ia, present in the International Youth Campaign yesterday, on the research project you are doing on retaliation against sexual survivors. And it's been very alarming to me to see that even high school survivors, they are facing with this retaliation by lawsuits, and that shouldn't happen at all. And we wonder how the schools can be a safer space, yeah, for everyone, boys and girls and all. Yes, thank you so much for very empowering presentation, Dana, and we will surely come back to that. And for our 6 panelists today with us, also from the Philippines, we have Rena Dollar from Samahan Progresibong Kabataan or SPARC. And Rena is a 3rd-year AB philosophy student in the Ateneo de Manila University. She is a member of SPARC, a progressive youth organization fighting for free, accessible, safe, and equality education for all. Yes, Rena, please have the floor.
Hi, let me share my screen. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. So I'm Rihanna from Samahan ng Progresibong Kabataan here in the Philippines. It can be translated as the Association of Progressive Youth. So again, we are a youth mass organization fighting for an equal, safe, free and accessible education. And overall, we are striving to confront and fight against neoliberal policies and authoritarian rule here in the Philippines and outside. So we convene here today to talk about the issue of academic freedom, and it has recently been in the forefront of student affairs, especially after the agreement between the University of the Philippines and the Department of National Defense has been terminated. The goal of this agreement was to protect student activists during peaceful protests inside the campus. But the government argued that this agreement has been used and abused by communists in the Philippines. In fact, the government task force against communists, the NTF-ELCAC, even released a list of universities which were claimed to be hotbeds of communist recruitment. So the phenomenon of red tagging or red scare tactic is being used by the state to persecute, to arrest, and to kill dissenters, activists, and labor organizers in the country. Legally, the academic freedom is understood merely as the regulation and the guarantee of institutional autonomy. There's little focus to the protection of students of the academic community who are speaking out, little focus on our liberties to organize ourselves. And this kind of understanding of academic freedom enabled a highly privatized, commercialized, and deregulated education system in the Philippines, manifested on how 80% of our higher education institutions are held by the private sector. And if we look at data, only 2 out of 10 grade 1 students are able to enter college. And with the heightened economic insecurity during this COVID-19 pandemic, how are we even sure that 2 out of those 10 students are able to complete their tertiary education? So the point I want to raise in today's discussion is academic freedom is nothing without accessibility. With the onset of the pandemic, we were forced to abruptly shift to distance learning. And along with that, we have to settle and manage fees for internet, for gadgets, for other living expenses, since we are studying at home. And that's why it's not a surprise that a significant number of students was not able to afford the shift to distance learning. Around 400,000 students in the tertiary level was not able to enroll this school year, on top of the 2 to 4 million students in the basic education unit that weren't able also to continue their formal education. So this lower enrollment counts is attributed to the lack of access to education-related resources, like books, internet, computers, funds for projects and outputs. And it's also exacerbated by the deregulated measures in the higher education, even allowing tuition fee increase amidst the pandemic and also the lousy internet infrastructure of the country. The Philippines actually has one of the slowest internet connectivity speeds, but yet our internet is very costly. Even our electric power industry is held by the private sector. So we see here that the tools and means for learning is not publicly accessed, is unaffordable and inaccessible for many. Even some students who chose the option to continue learning, some students had to be driven to desperate measures, including selling their bodies to pay for their gadgets and internet connection. So we also see here that inaccessible education cannot be divorced to sexual violence, to the illicit sex trade. On top of that, at least 38 students died due to accidents or suicide in their pursuit of education under the current distance setup. And just 2 days ago, the Commission on Higher Education also said that there's no going back to the traditional full-pack face-to-face learning. So if we are to view education as a public good, as a human right, as a democratizing factor, why then does the tools and resources needed to access those education privatized and inaccessible for many? So at the minimum, what the government can do is to subsidize the tools and resources for distance learning. And it stands to reason then that internet connectivity should also be treated as a basic human right. Since right now, in the middle of a pandemic, the digital spaces are very relevant to continue learning. But if they cannot do that, if we were to go back to the traditional face-to-face classrooms, then they should expedite the max vaccination efforts, since the student population falls on the last priority group for vaccination, and right now only 0.7% of the Filipino population has been vaccinated. That's really far from the 70% goal for herd immunity. So to summarize my point, state violence and police and military intimidation are forms of repression, but so is lack of accessibility. There is no academic freedom. It would be difficult to pursue intellectual growth, to harness our critical thinking if we are not in schools, if we are actually not in the platform to learn. There is no academic freedom unless we give everyone equal opportunity to learn. So our fight to defend and assert academic freedom cannot be divorced to the demand that our protected spaces are still spaces of learning. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Rihanna. A year of campaigning with you, with Spark, has really shown, I guess, for me personally, all the really big problems that you're talking about. And I think, in a way, these topics that you've discussed have also been discussed in many ways by our past speakers, by the dominance of corporate and private interest, by the heavy-handed responses of the state towards academic freedom and the right for students and faculty to express their opinions and organize. So all of these really are themes that carry over from the past discussions that our speakers have. So thank you so much for that, Rihanna. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to remind everyone that you guys can continue asking questions and bringing up your discussion points over in our Q&A section. And we'll be tackling the longer form questions, which is so far what we're getting, right? We'll be tackling the longer form questions in a Q&A section after our speakers list. So thanks so much for the discussion points and the questions that you guys are raising. We hope to be able to tackle as many of them later in our Q&A discussion after our speakers list. So thank you so much for all of those points. Next up is Akira Keen Teatrokulu from the Thai Student Union. Keen is a 15-year-old student currently studying their 4th year of secondary education at Triamadam Suksa School. They have an academic focus on philosophy, politics, and labor economics. Today, they will speak on the alienation and dehumanization of the Thai education system. The Thai Student Union is a youth network in Thailand that advocates for nationwide unions for students and learners in both informal and formal schooling systems. The network aims to counter authoritarian culture, unite students' voices in the education system, and reclaim human rights and dignity from the current dictatorial rule in Thailand. So, Keen?
Good day, everyone. Good day to my fellow comrades and friends, and to the attendees. As youth in our journey of lifelong learning, we strive to learn for a better future, to understand our society, and to be aware of the ever-changing state of our world. So I would agree with the theme and topic of today's webinar. A proposition of understanding on academic freedom in Thailand is the state of the current movement in my country, as the state of academic freedom worsens because of the current COVID-19 crisis. Academic freedom in Thailand has always been controlled and binarized, and even more exercised since the military coup in 2014 to the current Prut-Chan-o-cha hegemony. Many academics and political activists like Pawin Chachawan-Phongpan, Somsak Jiamshiwasekun, and Jawandita Apichai that criticized the coup and monarchy were called in by the state to be accused with charges and were left to go in exile for their safety, as well as leftist book publishers like Same Sky Books, an academic journal publisher that has been recently investigated for criticism of the state in their books. And also, a recent case of Les Majesté that happened in the north of Thailand, when two art students of Chiang Mai University exhibited a series of political artworks, one of which was a flag of Thailand that in the middle exhibited a gray replica of a corpse that was wrapped in cling film, which symbolized the overseas political refugees that were killed on order of the state, which also replaced the color of blue that symbolized the monarchy on the flag. And so other exhibits were seized by the university. Moving to my second point, the institution of education and thought is turned into the model of the state, all with authority and propagandization, which I believe that students in Thailand have always been exposed to ideologicalized right-wing learning resources and media, which I would say that immensely altered their thoughts and mores to be into a fixed binary, which I would say again that my point here is it devalues human diversity and human individuality. And my point of dehumanization in the system, it is how it destroys our feeling and expression of our natural rights. And the curriculum and view of the student ethics itself lays out an ideal framework for an ideal Thai citizen, which focus mostly on Buddhist ethics, sufficiency, economy, and the embracement of the Thai race. And for this does not just exclude ethnic minorities, but also colonize their cultures too. As conforming an ideology to our education system, as they force nationalist values on par with our human mores, the way they justify their beliefs of good and bad is quite horrifying and absurd for our learners. And so on what ground does the state justify the right of ideologicalization of human morality? And on what point of ideologicalized morality for a belief that is only limited to only good and evil will able to be find logic in their words without questioning them? And so if an ideology justifies what is right or wrong to our personal beliefs, then what is the point of turning humans against each other, as it is a common fact that humans are diverse in a society and we are all sentient? On that, nationalists who subject themselves as the oppressor to believe as doing a good act of morality to protect what they believe in exchange of their base of constituted human morality. As their view of the world is completely binarized by the generation gap and former state education, their ideologicalized morality judges a concept or an object to their understanding of the concepts or objects' structural features on par with former familiarity. They shall observe social familiarity of objects and concepts, which constitute beliefs of morality. And so this is turned into dogmatism for the nationalists. For only good and bad not only a mental judgment beyond good and evil. Thailand wants their youth to be a global citizen as a result of the system. But actually, in reality, they are creating a system which actually emphasizes the traditional values of obedience and dogmatism for our youth to send them into the world labor market as a means of production. From a political current of what is happening in Thailand that started in the March of 2020, academic freedom has always been conveying the main point of the movement. The movement was brought by books, papers, and scholars. As people were more aware of the state they were in, they started educating themselves in politics, sociology, and previous historical social movements too. The movement was quickly mobilized mainly at the core of academic freedom and the feeling of shared solidarity between humans in society. And so students started by running awareness campaigns about the political situation of Thailand in schools. Politics were up for discussion in classrooms, but yet the model of Thai schools censored them heavily, as well as the students getting expelled of political reasons. Some of them, or precisely 41 youths, getting warrants and charges. And for some of the charges were less majestic. The charge for defaming king, and it's all because they are fighting for their future, their rights, and what they believe in. From the dehumanizing education system to the reality of the state, what we are really fighting for is our future in this country, fighting for the other youth and other generation. And so schools should be a platform for discussion, diversity, and humanitarianism, not a platform for propagandization and brainwashing by the state. Amongst the chaos of the pandemic, many legislation acts were being proposed to Parliament. Without the people being aware, the government took advantage of the situation and did some political processes which proposed legislation acts. And so one of the legislation acts that were proposed into the Parliament was one of the legislation acts that is going to be proposed next week, probably next week, is the 2021 Education Act, which is drafted by the Office of the Council of State. The act includes excessive propagandization of righteous values and excessive tightness, and also controls the growth age of students as well as limiting the right of educators to teach with academic freedom. And I will cover the details of the legislation act shortly. And so the Thai Student Union plans to argue for the justification of ideology and authority. And so we are currently running a campaign of awareness before the official Senate to consideration. We yearn for an education legislation act based on universal design, based on the students themselves, not servants of the military or officials who do not respect the values of humanitarianism. And I will take on the details for the legislation act. The legislation act for Articles 6 and 7 will be covering the rights of the youth in what should they believe in, what is the result of being in this education system, and for Article 8, which sets the bar for youth achievement for each age growth, which leads to acceleration of learning, and for the youths that do not complete these tasks, which are tested yearly, I think so, they will be sent for consultation with doctors and will be forced to withdraw from normal classrooms, which alienates the youth from their learning environment. Okay, let me give everyone an example. Ages 1 and 3, the students shall understand emotion and try to embrace cultural Thainess. And ages 3 to 6 shall be able to control self-thought and emotion, and will be starting to understand between the good and bad of ethics. And for ages 6 to 12, will be emphasized to be proud of the national institutions of the state, which is the nation, the religion, and the monarchy. For Article,
sorry,
yes,
excuse me.
yes,
Please wrap up.
oh,
Thank you.
yes, I will. For Article 13 and 14, read the educators' right of academic freedom to draft their own curriculum. Article 21 and 22 will be exercising capitalized education. They'll give the right for schools to capitalize on their use as they wish. And for this year, they are ignoring disparities in the education system. And for Article number 26, will be school mergers and the management of capital within our school budget. And in this shall marginalize students for their right for education. And for the last two articles, which is Articles 80 and 82, is the connection with the state documents, like the 20-year strategic plan of Prayut Chan-o-cha, which is a plan that controls the drafting of legislation acts and the state changes, which disables the ability for immediate change in the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keen. And I think we have to thank as well, also as your fellow, maybe older generation of the Thai youth in Thailand, that last year we have seen such an inspiring mobilization in Thailand led by Gen Z and people as young as yourself and your fellows, the high school students who are mobilized and who are charged with very serious criminalization of law, for example, sedition. And you have mentioned for many times on the use of lèse majesté law or the royal defamation with a harsh punishment for more than 10 years in prison. And we have so many cases as young at high school that are already in jail or are charged with these allegations. And the process of law, fair trial, has been out of your knowledge. It's been insistently out of the justice system that we can imagine can be. Systematic denial of bail happened in Thailand. For example, lawyer Anand Nampa, who is the one who speak out on the royal reform, the monarchy reform, advocate is still in jail, even though he received the Gwangju Prize for Human Rights this week. And other point that you touch upon is that the heart of your struggle is also on the National Education Act, which is treating students as a subordinate, treating them as the youth who have to conform to power, and that was rooted deeply in our culture, and we have to tackle that. Thank you so much, Keen, for your bravery as well, and our solidarity to you and the mobilization as all the panelists here are struggle together on academic freedom. And yes, now we move to the last panelist we have with us today, Benny Agang. Benny is member of Central Committee of the SMI. He is the member of Indonesian Student Union, is a national level student organization in Indonesia that focuses on dealing with issues of education, democratization, and resistance to neoliberalism. Please welcome Benny.
Hello, everyone. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks, Sin. Sorry, I don't have slide to show, but I will try to explanation it systematically. Thank you for the insight shared by the previous speaker, and I will convey the condition regarding academic freedom in Indonesia and neoliberalism, which uses the state to commit violence. Therefore, neoliberalism is never, it's not the true freedom. Yeah. education the life of the nation. Every citizen deserves an education. Everyone has the right to freedom of association, to get together and to express an opinion. It's the preamble and a few chapters in the Constitution in Indonesia. How a country facilitates education as a fundamental right to be fulfilled and guarantees the freedom of its citizens is a legacy of sufficiently socio-economic progress in Indonesia. What I mentioned above has never changed since the Constitution was created now. In practice, third, the right to education and freedom of speech can be almost inversed. Education is a service provider institution and is no longer a right by the General Agreement on Trade in Service or GATT. Academic freedom is allowed only when it has no pretension that criticize the government. Forced reformation, the early 20s until now. Education, which has become a commodity, also has been increasingly internalized by the government. The initial goal of education was to educate the nation's life, but it was simplified only as an effort to get a job, which was then followed by the link and match concept in the world of education. Education in Indonesian. The orientation of education were directed toward the orientation as limited as being able to supply and demand the labor of the world of work. Interestingly, the logic of market held by government that forced people to view them as normal and sold used as a new value. It was a close one to what Gary Becker presented. It democratized the logic of capitalism, disseminating the logic across all levels of elements from previously concentrated only on capitalists, government, and corporate leaders, and broaden the range of logic on domains that were previously uneconomical: education, art, health, and politics. Then it is no longer the campus' primary duty to create and expert or to increase the capacity of human resources and educate the life of the nation. When referring to Tom Nicholas' argument, campuses are more market-oriented, not expert. And today, Indonesian education is very market-oriented. The last 2 years of 2019 and 2020 are the turning point for the student movement in Indonesia. The rejection to respond the revision of the Corruption Commission, the book of criminal law, labor in 2019 with hashtag reformasi di korupsi, the approval of the Universe Bloom board in 2020 with hashtag Mosi Tidak Percaya. Vote to not confidence, a deregulation from sparked a massive response by students across Indonesia to go to the street. By the 2 moments of rejection, the biggest student mobilization, around 100,000 times and more involved in all of Indonesia, which happened after the collapse of the New Order in 1998. The movement of schools directly without expectation and spontaneity that is like movement that develops from moral consciousness without a strong organization in the roots of the grassroots, the movement of other people. At the structural level, it can't do more. Only the defending of rulers here. It's not that protests don't work, but protests left to themselves can only sustain revolutionary for a limited period of time. The challenge currently plaguing Indonesia's left is how to provide platform channeling the recent experience of first-hand street warfare to other form of dissent and resistance, or as Leo Panitch puts it, to facilitate the process of class formation in Indonesia. It's a daunting and enviable task, but also one that has yet to be taken seriously. Students become active and involved in social issues after the two events were forcefully suppressed by the government, starting with a circular issue by Ministry of Education saying students should not participate in protests. The entry of security force into the campus environment is intimidating, dropout and suspension by the university unilaterally. According to our record in 2020 until 2021, there were about...
Excuse me, Benny, sorry, please wrap up.
Okay, John. Okay. But yeah, Indonesia to cultivate this growing political awareness and anticipate is so that it is not like the previous student movement, which were moralists and believe that the student movement is only part of a broader progressive political movement. Workers, peasants, the poor, the urban poor, who of course must have a political orientation in power and restore progressive political tradition in Indonesia. The student movement is not only a group critics from outside the system. It is not only able to exploit the reality of exploitation, but must be able to maintain this hope so that it seems possible to be realized. There must be many gaps in that opinion, and we also hope to be able to learn from the movement of comrades in the various countries that are present today. Long live solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Benny. I think it's a very strong last speaker for us here for our panel. I think it's great for us to close our list of speakers with talking about what it really means, why governments are repressing academic freedom. It's precisely because how the system understands, how the ruling class understands academic freedom is as deregulation, is as neoliberalism, is as directing the goals of the education system towards feeding an exploitative labor market, whether it be from the so-called developing world or from the so-called developed world. A response of this kind of view of academic freedom is hollow. It treats human capital and human potential as nothing more than a good to exploit, a commodity. And at the end of the day, really, when we talk about academic freedom, we are reminded of Benny's quote from Leo Panitch that we are in the process of the formation of a class consciousness. In Indonesia right now, students and the labor movement, workers and other basic sectors are right now developing a sharper political and class consciousness to combat the kinds of social situations that they find themselves in. But as that consciousness grows, as that commitment to social change and social transformation grows, then so too does the state's heavy hand. So to close that, I'd just like to announce that we still do have the question and answer portion as well as a summing up portion. So that means we'll be extending for around 20 to 30 more minutes. So please stay on because we're going to sum up and talk about concrete ways for us to move forward, to tie together all of our efforts, all of our campaigns, all of our struggles as youth globally, and see what we can come out with in terms of concrete commitments to each other, reaching across borders, reaching across oceans and continents to fight for real and lasting social transformation. Since?
Yes, so perhaps our team can show up and move on to the Q&A question. So we have compiled a very, very interesting and very enriched platform, and Q&A. Some have already been answered in written format already. And perhaps we are waiting for the technical team to show the slides. So we have selected a bunch of questions to address to some of the speakers that perhaps doesn't have a chance to answer to the question yet. So as we are waiting, right. For the first question, I think it will go to Balaji. How the school administrators or faculty liable or responsible in suppressing freedom of expression and assembly association in the respective university, especially towards organizations and campus publications, school papers, how we push oppressors and become a positive force to stop the culture of impunity.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. I mean, in my country, the university administrators are the key linchpins to suppress academic freedom. They are basically the stooges of the government. For example, me and my colleagues, my comrades, we are having more than 40 internal inquiries in our own university. And it's not as if it's those proctoral committees, more than 40, 50 inquiries are pending against me, my colleagues, my comrades, and numerous students. I mean, our degrees have been withheld because we raised slogans against the government, against the vice chancellor. So it's that brutal. I think the one aspect which I wish comes to picture world over everywhere is any brutality or any suppression of academic freedom or freedom of expression in any campus should be dealt in a way that symbolizes that no one else wants to do it in future. They should not only be named and shamed, but there has to be strict protocols, strict norms that ensure that that particular person can never serve again in the academic community again. For example, if my vice chancellor, who's presently the vice chancellor of JNU, for the crimes that he have committed, there should be a proper inquiry. And if found guilty, which he has done, he should never be given an opportunity to serve the academic community. I think that kind of punishment only serves the benefit for the academic community at the larger level.
Thank you so much. And I think for that, we also have perhaps a parallel perspective from Dana. I think it's also relevant to see how the pushback forces to maybe stop the very imbalanced design of the school's curriculum that can happen to academic freedom in terms of gender perspective. Dana, what do you think?
Thanks, Seth. I think it's important to find independent bodies that can help you seek accountability for the failures of institutions. So maybe you would be able to find these independent bodies in your relatively independent bodies in your institution. But if not, there are commissions, government agencies, other maybe professional associations that can help you engage the university and to help you call on the university to actually protect the people who are trying to bring to light the issues of the institution, for instance, campus publication. So I know this person is from the Philippines, so there are protections for journalists and campus journalists, as I'm sure you also know. So it would be a good strategy to appeal to these protections for journalists in order to show the institution that you are also knowledgeable of your rights, and also show that you also have a network outside the institution who are willing to back you up.
Thank you. And perhaps I'm going to deliver to John for the second question.
Sure, thanks, Synth. The second question, hold on, let me scroll up. All right, third question, I'm sorry, which is, I believe, directed to Abel. Abel, you still there? Question
I'm
on
here.
the mastermind of racism, the loss of democracy, and then silence. The movement of this student has something to do with the system embraced by the world, namely capitalism. What are the concrete steps in remodeling and improving education and capturing the rate of silencing so as to increase the level of awareness of the mass movement?
Okay, yeah, so I'm a little bit confused where the question was on the screen, but I see you now. I think, yeah, it's really about I think what to be aware of and to explicitly reject the way that capitalism has really managed to co-opt a lot of these positive movements in universities, and really exposing that and exposing when particularly my mind is partly on the previous question about how can the oppressive leaders in universities be a kind of positive force. I think it's kind of relevant to this because I think as long as they are these oppressive leaders are in positions of power, even their generosity that they express is based on a perpetuation of the injustice. So I think it's actually building our own alternative forms of power, not waiting for it to be changed by the current leaderships. So, for example, in UK universities, you have these, for example, decolonization working groups or anti-casualization of staff working groups that really promote very superficial changes and don't really tackle the root of the problem, which will only come from organizing from below. In terms of the monitoring of students and the awareness, I think it's really about building concrete organizations around this, reclaiming student unions, getting active participation in student unions. Of course, like we've heard, the struggle is already going on very strongly, I think, to establish those student unions in the first place, but to make them accountable, make the leaders of these student unions accountable, rich spaces of debate, I think is really important. And to have these political discussions in the spaces, student unions and in the staff unions as well, and having dialogue between the two, I think is a really positive step forwards.
Thanks so much for that, Abel. We'll go for another question. Question number 4. I believe this is for Keen. Can we flip to the next question, number 4? This is for Keen. Repressive measures of authoritarian regimes threaten the exercise of academic freedom. The culture of fear has a chilling effect, especially on common people. How do you organize students and people? What platforms do you utilize in organizing students and people? How do parents react to the issues in university, considering most parents are scared, especially for student activists? Keen?
Yes. We organize by, this is a hard question. I'm going to say that we utilize social media as a main platform of spreading information, spreading infographics, and spreading awareness campaigns. And so at first, I believe that we formed together a group with the same thoughts. This was in the first phase of the movement last year. For the student movements, we communicated with people or what's it called, to our friends from other schools or to our acquaintances on many universities or so we talk with them, we unionize, and we form it into a group, and the group starts sharing ideas with the concept of power sharing, and so the way we mobilize them is mainly through social media like Twitter, like Instagram or Facebook. These are the 3 main platforms that we call out everyone to the streets. We call for mobilization of our movement. And for on the parents thing, parents are certainly scared of their child getting arrested by the state, getting charged with many warrants, or yes. Our parents are in shock when we do our political activities, and They feel that it is unsafe for us to mobilize in the state of Thailand because the state will go to an extent on a scale that they believe that it will try to silence all the youth, the common people, and everyone that tries to oppose the state. Yes, and in short, yeah, parents are very scared of what would happen to their kids if they were involved with the movement. Yes.
Thanks so much for that, Keen. I believe the question is also directed to Rihanna. Rihanna, same question.
Hi. So Spark has been really making efforts to broaden our student network and build alliances with other student councils since the onset of the pandemic. We have been mostly exhausting our online spaces, also utilizing broadcast and print media to campaign for a better learning schemes for alternatives. I also mentioned in my presentation, such as increasing aid for disenfranchised workers, for subsidies for internet and gadget requirements in the distance learning. And we also initially campaigned for semester-long academic fees, but then main agencies such as the Commission on Higher Education and the Department of Education has been really unresponsive with our calls, but still we are making efforts. Also bringing our struggles to legal means, such as joining petitions on abrogating counterinsurgency programs and anti-poor and anti-people laws, like the anti-terror law. And also, I believe that we were also able to organize on-site demonstrations and protests to demand a seat, since the Commission on Higher Education planned to redefine academic freedom, since the issue sparked in the academic community. John can also share that we have been joining the consultations for the legislation of the Academic Freedom Act of 2021. Spark has been very active on also being a representative on the part of the youth on how academic freedom can be of practical significance for us. Well, it's inevitable that our parents are worried about us, but some parents are also progressive, very understanding of the situation of the crisis that we are currently facing right now. Yeah, it's a bit scared, but we need to do what we have to do.
Thanks so much, Rihanna. Definitely our parents here in the Philippines are very concerned about the things that we are doing, right? But that has to be done. Someone's got to do it, right? I'll hand the questions over to Sin.
Yes, sure. I just checked the chat, and then Benny also answered to question number 3. And perhaps, Benny, you would like to also speak further about your answers here? Yeah, the commercialization of education and suppression of students' right to dissent.
Yeah, for question number 3, in my organization vision is agree with remodeling or improving education system, but it can't be happen just by organization means is impossible. It is necessary but sufficient. It should be supported by progressive political party who is face to face with neoliberalism. We need extra effort for made alternative of education. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Benny. And thank you for the elaboration of the answers further on. And we leave second number 2, because I think it's very important question, very open as well, on how we can show solidarity with other student rights groups in other countries, how transnational community play a part to stop suppression of academic freedom, and how can AEPF, Asia Europe People's Forum, specifically do to offer solidarity to youth organizers and help these movements across Asia and Europe continue to speak to one another, build alliance and coalition. So I think this also goes to David first. We still have David that haven't yet been respond to questions here. And John, also remind me who do you think should be other lines up for this important question.
So I think it's extremely important to show support to these other groups, and I think social media is a very good platform to do so. And we have seen it over the years that progressive people could use social media to support other groups. We see it with Sean King, how he did it with Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, and I think it can be used the same way with student groups. And so I think you need to mobilize this with the help of social media and get as many people across the world with different backgrounds, with different educational level and with different experiences, trying to push for the same cause. And I think it's the biggest part is just making people aware of the problems that are in other countries, because I think especially in Western societies, people really don't understand how dire the situation might be in other countries, and even in their own countries, what the problems might be, and what they can do to fight against it.
Thank you, Japhet. And I think this question already answered by you, that many of the initiative has been done through the digital platform. That's very inspiring as well, how the digital world has been helping the civil mobilization happening here. And I think the other panelist that mentioned very well on international solidarity is Ali. Perhaps Ali could also explain how cross-country transnational communities can play a part to the suppression of academic freedom. Ali, still with us?
Yes, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So it's on the question on transnational communities, like solidarity to end the suppression of academic freedom. How do we show solidarity to each other across countries? Or the expected role of AEPF as well to play the role in this part?
Yes, I think I have also answered this question, but I will answer this again, that I think the transnational communities or other nations who want to help us and other organizations to end or to decrease this oppression, they can contribute in different on different levels. Like they can raise their voice on social media, on other media platforms, on platforms like Asia Europe People's Forum. And secondly, especially when we do any activity for the restoration of student union or any other demands, we expect from all comrades across countries to support us from their organizations. Secondly, The other thing in which we can collaborate is the experiences of other students organizations. Like in Pakistan, we don't have a long history of student union and student organization. So we can learn from other comrades like India and other organizations who have students organization to sustain our organization and to make institution through which we can sustain our organization for a long time, and to fight against this state oppression for long term in a sustainable way. Thirdly, as I suggest, we should not just transnational communities, but all other organizations to form a international platform through which we can, just like today, we can discuss and make strategies to make strategies to counter these issues, especially religious extremism, which is now a global issue. So I think we should make an international platform for this purpose. The other thing is the solidarity on the situation of oppression, like when someone is abducted or any state make cases on their students or on their youth. So everyone should come out and do symbolic protests in social media or grounds to show the solidarity. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Ali. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists for the answers that you've given, very patient, very detailed answers we've given to all of the questions and discussion points that our audience had raised. Just before we close, I believe something Britt Brennan from People's Solidarity Network wanted to raise up. Britt is inviting us, everyone here, to participate in a festival of ideas that People's Solidarity Network is co-organizing with other movements, including activist scholars. This will be for 3 consecutive Sundays, June 6, June 27, and July 18th. So if anyone is interested in participating in the upcoming Festival of Ideas, let us know, let Britt know, and we'll get each other connected. To sum up everything that we've discussed, Synth, I'd like to ask you, I guess, just for a short statement, what do you think we can sort of tie together and get from all of our various very diverse speakers for tonight?
Yes, this is very important, very challenging as well to see how this can come together. But I think that we share a lot of commonalities, and we can see it perhaps in 3 perspectives that I observed so far, in terms of actors, in terms of system, and in terms of context as well, that we can maybe weave it together to see how we can tackle it. And first on actors, I think when the speaker says about the situation, the state of academic freedom in their country, it seems like it's a very broad definition that they have provided here. And the actors that has been perpetuated the situation is quite a wide range of them pushing back academic freedom. And we've seen many clashes between the principle of academic freedom, the one who have the duty bearer, for example, the Ministry of Education. We see in India how they use the anti-science proposal, how they cut funds, especially in the epidemic, as well as in the Philippines, how the higher education agencies, they still lift the tuition fee during this time when children and students are quite having a hard time economically. And also we see many organizations that have duty to protect, they ignore the roles. For example, the school, they have to secure the safe space to ensure student participation to anti discrimination or sexism culture in school. And also, I think the most worrisome perpetrator is the state itself, where the government have under the constitutional rights to protect academic freedom and expression, but they deny to do so, and sometimes even engaged with other security, with military persons, like Alice mentioned, they are occupied in campus to stop students, even in the UK, to end academic freedom and political activities done by the student. And that is worrisome on the academic freedom across countries. I'm seeing the use of law as well to constrict and control students and academic intellectual communities, and the harsh punishment as such, like the terrorism, the sedition, royal defamation is quite a situation that we shouldn't have been met in the 21st century here. It's very outrageous, the situation we are fighting back here. And it's also interesting to see as well that in all the 7 countries, 8 speakers, the weaponization of law has been largely led by state this time, ranging from them and sometimes by the perpetrator itself in the sexual allegations, as Dana has mentioned. And thirdly, on actors, we also see the corporate. The corporate itself is also the one who commodifying knowledge to mistreat how academic freedom should be. And that is only the actor. We also have the system involved here that's quite being a large part of or the infringement of academic freedom. We've seen the rise of the right-wing nationalism, the ultra-nationalist movement, authoritarian regime, dictatorial rule, illiberal governments across Asia and Europe that have the role in the infringement of the overall civil liberty and academic freedom. And we also have the system of a strongman, controversial strongman in the case of Philippines, I guess, on the non-gender responsive, non-gender sensitive policy the government made, the misogyny, the discrimination based on sex. We also have the neoliberalist approach to education, which disrupt a lot on academic freedom. We also have the system of corporatism on commodifying knowledge. And this has also disrupted the overall, the richness of academic and knowledge we have. And lastly, on the context, of course, COVID-19, we've seen a lot of vulnerabilities on the parents, on student and learners, and they struggle very difficultly on the wage, on the job insecurity as well. And also in terms of political, we've seen the government use of state of emergency to ban political gathering, assembly. And I think this time we can see it also as the opportunity that this is an acceleration of process to redesign the platform to move forward for the world we want. And I think this is the question that you have been asked for, that how we can move forward in terms of pushing academic freedom and have it as a democratizing factor. So back to you, I think, John.
Thanks so much, Synth. I guess on a more hopeful note, right, even though we're seeing all of these definitely very bad things that are happening to the state of academic freedom all around the world, I think what's very, very hopeful is that we are becoming ever more conscious of how terrible the situation is and of the importance that academic freedom plays in looking forward in the months and in the years and the decades during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. I think one very key thing to take home here is to understand that there are so many interests at play within the education sector and within the realm of civil and political rights. I recall very especially the points that Japhet had raised in his presentation about the power of corporate interests inside research, inside the academia. I recall as well discussion points from Rihanna Dolor from the Philippines, where 80% of the national college level education system is dominated by private interests, and where academic freedom is not understood to be the exercise of basic civil and political rights within a campus, but is understood to be the deregulation of schools, the deregulation of a privatized education system. And this is something that oftentimes, I guess, when we talk about, we think of this as something that's happening exclusively within the developing world, which is in many aspects definitely true, right? This is something that is especially happening in the developing world. But this is also something that I guess for many of us here in Asia are, I guess, not as aware of as things that are happening in our own backyard. But this is also something that's happening in Europe, in the so-called heartland of democracy, I believe was the term that was used earlier in the AEPF plenary, right? That in the very heartland of democracy, where rights are supposed to be, at least in theory, the most guarded, the most sacred, these rights are themselves being violated, eroded, destroyed. And seeing this, seeing all of this, this growing consciousness coming from the youth all around the world, I think promises great things for us in the future. What is left for us is to act, and to act now. This growing consciousness must translate into action, into commitment to build further bridges, stronger, deeper, bigger bridges to link with each other up in the future, build real international solidarity, fight against a global system of exploitation, of oppression, and that which prevents us from attaining our full human potential. So I guess on a more concrete note, right? I guess on a more concrete note, what this really means is that we're committing to maintaining contact. We're committing to fighting by each other, learning more about what happens to each other, learning more about the kinds of struggles that we have with each other. I recall the points that Ali Raza had raised earlier, that students in Pakistan, while they grow their political consciousness and gain ever more experience from their own environment, also want to learn even more from the experiences of other students and youth in the countries around them. And I think this is something, this is a mindset that's so vital for us right here and right now. We need to think about learning from each other, from our own experiences. And by doing so, we begin to see that there is a universal human experience here, where we see from our own experiences, different as they may be from each other, that the oppression and exploitation of peoples all around the world is always and ever present, and that the fight continues on. We need to keep fighting. We need to keep fighting by each other. I guess that's what it means for us, right? For the speakers, for the panelists, and hopefully for our audience right now. Stick by each other, struggle by each other. We still have a world to win. We still have a world to win. Thank you all. Thank you to all our attendees. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for the very rich discussions that we've had today, and we hope we'll have even more of these in the future. Before we close, I'd really just like to note that this is the first time in the 13 times that there has been an AEPF forum. This is the first time that there have been youth events that have been held. So this by itself is already a great thing for us. But again, let's not rest on our laurels. Let's keep fighting. Let's keep committing. Let's keep building ever stronger, deeper, bigger bridges to fight a global struggle with each other right here, right now. Solidarity to all of us. We still have a world to win. Thank you so much to everyone who attended and spoke for our event today. And hopefully we'll maintain contact, definitely from my side, right? From my side and from my organization. We'd be more than happy to maintain contact and work and schedule events and campaigns with you guys in the future. Thank you so much.